Like some musical flash mob before flash mobs were a thing. This was cool before it was cool. And it wasn't even a mob because it was only 4 people. So really, I guess it was like a flash quartet. They sang, "This is my song," but not in those words, and not in the traditional Finland national anthem words. It was their high school choral anthem, and they randomly found a beautiful half-dome sculpture to gather under, this thing built of concrete, as they were blessed there by the clear blue sky, bluer than the ocean, sunlight beaming. And they began singing, and a few folks who were walking on the boardwalk along Lake Superior stopped to listen. And one older gentleman, awash in the sunshine, stood there almost clinging onto what seemed to be his adult daughter next to him, tears streaming down from underneath his sunglasses as he stood there in wonder with this gathered community, just listening to the harmonies. And as the song came to a close, a quiet but a hearty applause from the little congregation that had gathered there along the boardwalk rose up, and one of the singers, after the song was done, went over to this older gentleman with tears of joy and asked, "Is everything okay?" The only thing the singer was thinking was, I don't know, maybe he went to our high school. But they had never met anyone with that deep of an affinity to their choral anthem for their high school. But the daughter next to him simply responded, "My father doesn't speak English, but he's from Finland. He's homesick, and you just sang the anthem of his people from across the sea. You blessed him with your music." And perhaps luckily he didn't know English, because then he didn't know that they were singing about a high school and not the traditional words, so it maintained its eloquence for him. In those moments, music opened a passageway, a possibility for connection beyond spoken language, a bridge where one's love for homeland met in community, expanded beyond the self. Because shared experiences of beauty and shared experiences of brokenness make us cling to one another, to whoever is right next to us, tears streaming down our faces at times. We connect to a community, a country, something larger than ourselves. Those songs, those identities, they live in our hearts. And as much as courage is about diving deep into your own core values, it's just as much breaking the heart open, moving it beyond individualism, beyond the self alone, moving toward some sense of a larger whole, some collective of the common good, some larger life. "I live my life in ever-widening circles," writes Rilke, "that reach out across the world, and I may not complete this last one, but I give myself to it because I've circled around God, I've circled around the primordial tower, I've been circling for thousands of years, and still I don't know. Am I a falcon, or am I a storm, or am I a great song?" How we hold on to our identities and how we express and live out the core values and hopes and dreams of who we are is a matter of how we live by heart. From that, we begin to craft together the communities in which we live. "The human heart is the first home of democracy," writes Terry Tempest Williams. "It is where we embrace our questions. Can we be equitable? Can we be generous? Can we listen with our whole beings, not just our minds? Can we offer our attention rather than only our opinions?" The balance of the individual and the community is an essential question, has been for millennia, people and cultures and places trying to figure it out. Different cultures and traditions have been asking these questions and offering various answers, at times almost like a teeter-totter or like a scale, sometimes leaning toward the individual to lift that up, sometimes leaning toward community to lift that up, all for good reason. They have shifted because no tradition and no culture has any final, absolute answer for everybody, really on much of anything, that can be sealed and bound and cast in stone for all time or for all eternity. Because things shift and the world changes and people change and morph dependent on time and place and circumstance. And yet there are some things we know. Some things we know about our biology and our survival as a species, primarily the truth that we are social by nature. We need each other. We live in relationship. From the very beginning of our lives, we are relational. A baby cannot survive on its own, and while in some ways that changes over time, I would argue in most ways, in most of the meaningful ways, that doesn't change at all. We can't survive on our own. There is something about our core, about the heart, and the ability to break open with compassion and with empathy, with generosity and creativity and love that connects us and creates who we are. Within us is a yearning, writes Parker Palmer, that George shared with us this morning, for something better than divisiveness, better than toxicity and passivity, powerlessness, selling our democratic heritage to the highest bidder. Within us is the courage to pursue that yearning, to hold life's tensions consciously, faithfully, until they break us open, he writes. And the broken open heart is a source both of power and of compassion. Our response to the realities and the hardships and challenges and the despair of the world are crafted and curated by the culture in which we live. When one's heart is immersed, steeped as if it's in tea, in a culture of rugged individualism and commercialism and militarism, it becomes normative to how we think, how we act. It's in the air we breathe. So I'm not sure how many of you saw the Super Bowl commercial for a certain pickup truck, that will go unnamed, using the words from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. about the greatness of serving, of being a servant for the betterment and the well-being of humanity. It is a great quote. It's a beautiful teaching. And I don't necessarily think it's bad for a company or corporation to lift up beautiful and important social teachings. However, there is a unique irony in this one, a twisted logic that takes some virtue, some value, uses it or turns it in such a way that becomes deceptive and creates the very thing the teaching was meant to go against. So later, in the exact same speech, literally the exact same speech from Dr. King that was used to sell pickups in this commercial, Dr. King said these words, "We are so often taken by advertisers. You know, those gentlemen of massive verbal persuasion, and they have a way of saying things to you that kind of gets you into buying things. And in order to make your neighbors envious, you must drive, no kidding, this type of car. And you know, before you know, you're just buying that stuff. I've got to drive this car because there's something about this car that makes my car a little better than my neighbor's car. And I'm sad to say," he says, "that the nation in which we live is the supreme culprit in doing this." Good Lord. The internet fixed that quickly, and if you have a bunch of clergy colleague friends on your Facebook feed, like some of us do, they fixed it real quickly. And so they laid those words, you can find it now, laid over that commercial on YouTube. It's very interesting to watch if you want to see it. I'll send you the link. So this wider culture takes something like service to your neighbor and twists it into the need to purchase something, where individualism and consumerism become the filters through which we see everything. And it seems okay because the words sound so good. We have a culture that does that in a lot of ways. One other value that we take is the protection of children and safety and peace in our communities. And then we join that with a social fixation on autonomy of the self, protection of the self, and militarism. And then we take a situation like Sandy Hook Elementary in 2012, and we twist the value of safety into violence until you can't recognize it anymore, and a logical response then seems to be give teachers handguns in their classrooms to prevent this. So Mary Catherine Ricker in 2012 was president of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers. And in the aftermath and national conversation following Sandy Hook, she was swept into the debate about arming educators with guns in their classrooms, something that was horrifying, particularly to me at the time. My wife's an elementary teacher, and when Sandy Hook happened, she was teaching in first grade in St. Paul. And so in a response to that, the president of the Teachers Union wrote this entitled "License to Teach." Here's an excerpt of it. Some say the answer to stop school shootings is more guns, joining the smattering of elected officials who recently have promoted the idea of arming teachers and principals. If one person with a gun can wreak havoc on a military base where other guns are present and mostly our most skilled soldiers are present, what makes the gun lobby think that arming a nation of book-loving, denim jumper-wearing, whiteboard marker-toting, wooden apple bead necklace-making teachers and the rest of us will be effective? You want to arm me, she writes? Good. Then arm me with a school psychologist at my school who has time to do more than test and to sit in meetings about testing. Arm me with enough counselors so we can build skills to prevent violence and have meaningful conversations with students about their future and not merely frantically adjust their schedules like some Jenga game. Arm me with social workers who can thoughtfully attend to a student's and her family's needs so that I can teach. Arm me with enough school nurses so that they are accessible to every child and can work with me as a team rather than operate their offices as some de facto urgent care center that doesn't have enough health care for our country's poor. Arm me with more days on the calendar for teaching and for learning and fewer days for standardized testing. Arm me with class sizes that allow my colleagues and me to both know our students and their families well. Arm me and my colleagues with the time it takes to improve together and the time it takes to give great feedback to our students until you can arm me to the hilt with all that it will take to meet the needs of an increasingly vulnerable student population. I respectfully request that the gun lobby keeps your opinions about our schools and our safety to yourselves. Amen to that. When a society takes a value, like protecting children, like serving your neighbor, like supporting workers, and twists it through filters of individualism and consumerism and militarism, we get guns in schools, and we get competitive capitalism. We get free-range corporations with no accountability to the degradation of the planet or to people or the devastation of systemic poverty. The Reverend Dr. William Barber, former president of the NAACP in North Carolina and leading theologian of the Renewed Poor People's Campaign, has spoken throughout the country about the need for a moral revival, for ancient traditions calling us back to justice and equity, to be what he calls moral defibrillators for the heart of America. He says, we know we have a heart problem in America when religion is used as meanness and as judgment, when politics is used to mask hatred, to trample the poor and isolate identities, and not only use the rhetoric of nationalism to build a border, physical and spiritual, around the heart of our country, but also to try to cast out those with dreams of finding a home here. There is a problem with the moral heart of our country, he says, when another theologian says, make no mistake, nationalism is a religion and war is its liturgy. We take some value and we twist it beyond recognition because the pathways are too often clogged with indifference, greed, judgment, good air can't get through, until the point when we need what Dorothy Day called a revolution of the heart. So maybe you've seen this practice, or you've done it yourself, where you write down some story about your identity maybe, or the world, or you write down some value or some hope, something that you hope to be true or you think should be true about yourself or the world, and you sit with it for a few moments, and then you're asked to sit with that truth a little bit and see how it might be limited. Even if it's good, what is missing from that wider story, the wider perspective? So you take a phrase that seems good, right? That we are all the same. And you sit with that and you look at it and you think about maybe there are nuances that are missing from that. So you take that and you rip it in half. And then you put it outside. And then you put down another paper. And you think about some other truth that you want to add to that. Not get rid of the first one, because there might be something good in that, but add to it. So you expand it, put something in the middle. So you put something like, we are different. So that has truth to it, and it has nuances that are good and maybe not so helpful. So you rip it in half, and you add it to the side. And then you add another truth to nuance it a little more, expand the story a little more, that says we are both. We are the same, and we are different. And still you think, and there's still more I want to say about that. So you rip it in thirds, and then you push it to the side, and then you add something finally in the center that speaks a little more about what you're trying to say, and you say both is beautiful. And maybe there's a different story that you have or different teachings, and then you go to the RE wing, and you grab some paper and you grab some markers. Joyce helps you. And then you keep expanding the story. You widen it out until it's something that holds something larger than just one simple truth or one simple narrative. Maybe they're just phrases. Maybe they're about your identity. Maybe it's a larger story that you're hoping to write. But whatever it is, you expand it out. And then you gather the scraps and put them back in the pulpit. But you keep ripping it in half and pushing the story a little wider and a little wider, expanding it and breaking it open again and again until the story is wide enough, until the words are broken open enough, until your heart and your identity are wide and open enough to be tender enough to break open without breaking completely apart. The broken open heart is a source of power as well as compassion, writes Parker Palmer. The broken open heart, one that moves beyond rigidity of self-focus only, is one that moves in the rhythm with the larger sense of we, and realizing that that means knowing our similarities and knowing our differences and holding them as beautiful. This is our song for peace, to remember that there are beautiful blue skies and beautiful sunshine in other lands beyond our own. Moving out of individualism doesn't mean you lose a sense of pride in yourself or who your people are or where your place is, but you put it in a larger, beautiful mosaic of what the world can and might be when we truly know and name and notice one another. There are other hearts beating in other lands that have just as true and just as high dreams as yourself. One of the hardest lessons in life, one which is a regular lesson in our home right now with our young children, is how to move from the language of mine, we hear that a lot, to our. And that is a lifelong lesson that I'm still learning. I think maybe some of you are too in some ways. We as a culture, I know, still have a lot of work to do between mine and our, from the individual to the collective, until we know somewhere deep down what one pastor and activist in Minneapolis says: there is no such thing as other people's children. There's no such thing as other people's children. This is radical interconnection, and it's actually an old principle, and sometimes it takes our hearts to be broken open to remember that we need one another. And sometimes we need to find the time and the space to open passageways for fresh air to come through, so values and virtues don't get clogged with self-absorbed greed or indifference. And there maybe we can gather with a few others under the dome of our own beautiful blue sky, blessed by the sun on our faces and the song in our soul, and we join voices and join hearts, and we make a harmony, familiar enough, simple enough to break open the heart and let tears roll down beneath the sunglasses and cling to one another like a blessing, because that's what it is. And we remember who we are and who are our people, and we remember again that the song is not mine. The song is ours. May it be so. Amen. The hymn is number